Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay, here to do another review of WWE Monday Night Raw, 2000, April 28th, 2025. Yeah, this Raw was good. It opened up with Seth Rollins coming out with the. They're calling it. Some people are calling it Evolution 2.0. Some people are calling it the New Dangerous Alliance. I like the idea of the Dangerous Alliance. Evolution doesn't really make much sense because evolution was supposed to be um, was the idea for evolution when it first formed back in 2002 was 2002-3 was for two rookies, Randy Orton and Batista, a current star in Triple H, and a legend in Ric Flair. This doesn't have that. This has Paul Heyman. He's a legend. He's a Hall of Famer. But at the same time, he's not a wrestler. Seth Rollins is your current star, and Braun Breaker is your new star. This is closer to Paul Heyman's WCW faction that formed in 1991. Initially, we talked about it, but we didn't really ever talk about Halloween Havoc 1991. But here's the basic breakdown, just a preview, a little of it. Paul Heyman um, was in WCW, of course, came to WCW from the AWA in the 1980s, 1988, as part of the Real Midnight Express. Dennis Condrey and Randy Rose to feud with Stan Lane and Bobby Eaton. Uh, Jim Cornette had his Midnight Express. Paul Heyman had his Midnight Express. Paul Heyman's Midnight Express had been wrestling in the AWA, but the AWA wasn't doing so well, so they left the AWA and went to the WCW because Jim Cornette had just turned babyface. He was supposed to be feuding with the Four Horsemen, but the Four Horsemen, Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson, left and went to the WWF. So they needed somebody to work with. They liked Paul Heyman's work. And that's when he came there. Well, the booker for WCW at that time, George Scott, he didn't like the Midnight Express. He didn't want to pay Randy Rose and Dennis Condrey, so both of them left. So that was the end of the original Midnight Express versus the new Midnight Express gimmick. So Heyman then became the manager of the Samoan SWAT team, the team that would, when they would leave WCW and go to the WWF in late 1992, early 1993, they would become the Head Shrinkers. But after that was done, uh, Paul Heyman had some problems with Ric Flair, who had taken over the booking for George Scott in WCW. So he was let go again. He was let go again. But at the same time, in late 1991, in the midst of a feud that he was having in the WWF with the Big Boss Man, because Bobby Heenan had been antagonizing the Boss Man, making fun of his mother. So that was supposed to lead to a match between Rick Rude, who was a member of the Heenan family, and the Big Boss Man. Well, that didn't happen because around the time of Halloween Havoc 91, WCW started promoting the idea of uh, a Halloween Phantom, a surprise person debuting in WCW. And that person turned out to be Ravishing Rick Rude. So Heyman became Ravishing Rick Rude's manager. Now, around the same time, the Horsemen were no longer going to be able to exist because Ric Flair left WCW to go to the WWF. So they needed a new faction. So the faction was formed around Ravishing Rick Rude, eventually included Arn Anderson, Bobby Eaton, uh, and a stunning Steve Austin, who had just come over to WCW from WCCW um, earlier that year. And from that time, Halloween Havoc 1991 till Wrestle War 1992, that was Paul Heyman's faction. Basically, a heel faction. They feuded with Sting, they feuded with Ricky Steamboat, they feuded with the Steiner brothers, and that was the Dangerous Alliance. And the idea was Paul Heyman was the CEO of the Dangerous Alliance because at that time he was called Paulie Dangerously. He had a cell phone, the brick Zach Morris type phones, and that was his gimmick. Like Jim Cornette had the racket, Jimmy Hart had the megaphone, Mr. Fuji had the cane, Alexander York, aka Terry Runnels, she had the computer with the York Foundation. Every manager had their sort of gimmick thing. Mr. Fuji later with Yokozuna had the salt they would use to interfere. So that was Paul Heyman's. And the idea was that Paul Heyman was recruiting these wrestlers. He was recruiting Rick Rude, Bobby Eaton, Arn Anderson, and stunning Steve Austin. So the faction was his faction. This is kind of similar. But instead of Rick Rude, you have Seth freaking Rollins. It makes perfect sense to me. And Medusa was also in this faction, which leads many to believe that this is the new Dangerous Alliance, that Becky Lynch will probably be in it. But anyway, they come out and they, Seth Rollins calls himself the visionary, the revolutionary. He says that he has a vision for the future of the WWE. And then Sami Zayn's music hits. Now, Sami Zayn last week, we all thought Sami Zayn comes out to congratulate Jey Uso. We remember the history that they had together in the bloodline. So we're like, okay, he's gonna come out and he's gonna attack Jey. He's gonna turn heel. Whatever he doesn't do that, Jimmy comes out. They all celebrate Jey Uso's winning the World Heavyweight Championship. So he comes out this time. He says, he basically calls Seth Rollins out in his BS. He says, Seth, you're full of shit. You talk about you're doing this with the best for the business and all that shit, but you're not doing it for that. You're doing it for yourself. You're doing it for Seth freaking Rollins. And he tells him, listen, you have to the end of the night to switch brands. You can do this the easy way, or you can do this the hard way. You can go to SmackDown, where Paul Heyman later on, Sammy is backstage just having a conversation with Otis, and Paul Heyman pulls up. He kicks Otis out of the room, and then he tells Sammy, if you go, we are both OG members of the OG bloodline, right? And then Sammy says, yeah, but you were the one who killed the bloodline at what you did at WrestleMania. So he tells him, listen, if you go to SmackDown, I can guarantee you that you will face the winner of Randy Orton versus John Cena for the WWE Championship. So we're all waiting throughout the night for Rollins's, Sami Zayn's decision. Will he join up with the new Dangerous Alliance, or will he go to SmackDown like Seth wants him to? So that's the main story of the night, is Sammy's decision. Also, we have the Viking Experience, the War Raiders, whatever you want to call them, Eric and Ibar taking on the Judgment Day of J.D. McDonough and Finn Balor. Now, they're in the clubhouse, they're chilling and stuff, they're playing video games. Dom is there, Carlito is there, Liv Morgan, Raquel Rodriguez, they're all there, right? And they dropped this bomb on Finn Balor. basically that Finn Balor and JD McDonough will take on the Viking Raiders later on in the night. And he's like, "What? Next time, just tell me." And Liv's like, "I figured since you're the only one without a championship that you would want a championship." And then Carlito says, "Wait a minute, you're not the only one without a championship. Carlito doesn't have a championship." Well, Carlito's coming out with them for their match, and it's a pretty good match. Like I noticed a lot of aggressiveness, man. Like one of the Viking Raiders' arms was bleeding, so Finn Balor with that European style definitely laying it in, and JD McDonough as well. And also, it's announced that Adam Pearce is not there for the night, and Nick Aldis, the SmackDown general manager, is taking over, which will play a role a little bit later in an announcement they make. But it was a pretty good match. But Penta comes out and he cost the Judgment Day the match after Carlito distracts the referee by throwing the apple in the ring, and he thinks this will help the Judgment Day. This is all leading to, I think, just based on what happened at WrestleMania, the final breakup of the Judgment Day. Um, or at least Finn Balor getting kicked out. I mean, Dominic Mysterio is at a point where he doesn't need the Judgment Day. Carlito, he's just there. Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez, they don't really need the Judgment Day either. It's a faction that has outlived its usefulness. And speaking of a faction that outlived its usefulness, the New Day are on commentary during this match, and they suck. You know what I mean? Like they completely suck. You could tell Xavier Woods and Kofi Kingston are trying way too hard to try to get over as heels. It's just time to end this faction. They've existed for over 10 years now. I mean, it's unreal that a faction could exist for that long in professional wrestling in one iteration. I mean, the most successful factions in wrestling, be they the NWO, be they the Four Horsemen, be they um, the Freebirds, be they Evolution, be they the Bloodline, they didn't exist for that long. The Four Horsemen, in their first iteration, existed from 1985 to 1988 after Oli was kicked out, and then from 1988 to about 1990. I mean, you know, they brought them back in different waves, later on. Like when Flair came back, they brought him back in 93 with Paul Roma, and then they brought him back in 95. But even their run from 95 to 99 wasn't as long as this. You know, I mean, the first incarnation of the Four Horsemen with Ole Anderson, Arn Anderson, Ric Flair, and Tully Blanchard was only from 1985 to 1988, right? With the NWO, they were from 96, the first to about 1999, give or take 2000. Because then you had two versions of the NWO, Wolfpack and Hollywood, and then you had the Silver and Black NWO that reunited the night after Starrcade 1999 with Bret Hart as the leader. But even then, and even if you want to go into their years in the WWE, okay, 1996 to 2002, that's not 10 years. Evolution didn't exist for that long. The Evolution existed from 2002 to 2005, and then they were brought back briefly in 2014 to feud with The Shield. The Shield existed from 2012 to 2014. The Bloodline existed from 2020 to, and again, different iterations because you had Solo Sikoa's Bloodline and you had Roman Reigns' Bloodline. But let's just say Roman Reigns' Bloodline existed from uh, uh, from 2020 to about 2024. That's only 4 years. So the maximum you could probably get out of a faction would be about like 3 or 4 years. Even the Freebirds. say the Freebirds formed like in 1979 and existed, okay, you could say until like 1994, but again, different iterations. The WCW version of the Freebirds wasn't anything like uh, the World Class Championship Wrestling or Mid South version of the Freebirds when they first came out. That was Buddy Roberts, Terry Gordy, and Michael P.S. Hayes. When you start to add Jimmy Jam Garvin into the mix, you have a different faction. So again, a lot of successful factions have different iterations, but this iteration, these three, well, now Big E's out of the mix, but they just kicked Big E out. It's the longest faction ever in history, and it's boring now. You know what I mean? Like the reason it existed was to target the racial strife of the United States, during that time in 2014, right? With the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement after Trayvon Martin's death, to tap into stuff like that. That stuff is not even relevant now. We're on some whole other shit politically and socially. Uh, now. You know what I mean? So it's pretty much time to end this faction. They suck. Their time is past due. A match. The main event for the evening was Evie Nile versus Stephanie Vakir, and it wasn't for the NXT title. It was just a regular match, and I love this match. It was pretty cool. The women on the show had the two best matches on the show were the women's matches. Uh, Rhea Ripley taking on Roxanne Perez. Julia showed up, so with Julia showing up to even the odds, Io Sky saved Rhea Ripley this time, uh, as opposed to the way it was last week when Rhea came out to save Io Sky. So now, what I think is going to happen is that Io Sky and Rhea Ripley are going to form a reluctant tag team, and they're going to take on Stephanie Bakir and Julia as Stephanie Bakir and Julia come to the main Roxanne Perez and Julia come to the main roster. And people have been wanting to see Roxanne Perez in the main roster anyway, given the tremendous showing that she had this year at the Royal Rumble. We get a Becky Lynch promo saying why she turned on Lyra Valkyrian. I didn't really like this, man. I'm not really feeling the Becky Lynch heel performance. To me, it just seems a little forced. I know why she's doing this. I mean, she considers Lyra Valkyrian, like a student of hers, so they'll be taking on each other at Backlash. And then another match that was formed for Backlash was Pat McAfee finally wrestling another match. The last time we saw Pat McAfee wrestle, he wrestled Vince McMahon at WrestleMania 38 in 2022. Who can forget, too, the match he had with Adam Cole back in 2020 at NXT? One of the takeovers. Pat McAfee is pretty good. In the wake of Mongo McMichael dying, I thought, I forgot to put in that video. Man, Mongo walked so Pat McAfee could run. Basically, the road that Mongo paved of a former football player, a former successful football player transitioning into the world of professional wrestling, was similar to what Pat McAfee is doing now. But I feel like McAfee is a better performer and a better wrestler. So he comes out, he begs Nick Aldis to make a match with him and Gunther for Backlash, and Nick Aldis came out and made that match. You know what I mean? So that's what we'll be seeing: Pat McAfee versus Gunther at Backlash. Then finally, it comes time for Sami Zayn's decision. Predictably, if you've been watching wrestling for as long as I have, you already know what's going to happen. Sami Zayn says no. He says that he will win a World Heavyweight Championship. He says he refuses Seth Rollins' offer. Rollins brings up when his daughter was born, and that Sammy was the first person that he called and everything. And I like the storyline because I like Sammy. 2014, the first NXT takeover I ever watched. It had two matches that impressed me: Natty Neidhart versus Charlotte Flair with Brett and Ric Flair in each corner, and the Sami Zayn Kevin Owens match. I watched Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens way back in the day, like I'm talking about 2010, 2011 ish, when they were in Ring of Honor, and Sami was El Generico and Kevin Owens was Kevin Steen. I didn't really watch Ring of Honor all that much. Like, um, my fiance and I had friends that were online that were hardcore fans of Ring of Honor, and they would tell us about it. We watched certain videos, but one match we did watch was El Generico versus Steen. So when Generico, Sami Zayn, and Steen came to WWE as Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens, we had to see it. And we watched it, and it was tremendous. And I posted that night on my Facebook page in 2013. I said, Sami Zayn is the future of this of the WWE, of this company. You know what I mean? And back when he was having his issues with 2 years ago, when he was having his issues with the Bloodline, and he finally turned on the Bloodline at the Royal Rumble and had that match with Roman at that Elimination Chamber in Montreal. I just felt it. I said that was the time to pull the trigger with Sami. But of course they didn't, because Cody Rhodes, was just came back to the company, and they already had it set up for Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 39. So Sami had to wait his turn. But now I feel like they could build a storyline with Sami overcoming the odds against this dangerous alliance group, and then make him like a sympathetic babyface. Make him like a Mick Foley. People are calling him the Mick Foley of this generation because he struggled in the indies and he struggled to build an audience. And he is an unconventional looking wrestler. I mean, he's a fishy white babyface, a white Arab Canadian, a white Arab French Canadian, ginger looking guy. You know what I mean? You know, like he can't get any different with a luchador gimmick. Well, he doesn't have the luchador gimmick anymore, but like you couldn't get any more different, any more conventional than Sami Zayn is. You know what I mean? French speaking, Arab, and really, really a fishy, as Jim Cornette would say, a fishy white babyface. But people love him, man, and people are behind him, and you could really build him into something special. I think of not only Mick Foley, but Daniel Bryan, the Yes Movement. I remember watching SummerSlam 2013, and we're watching John Cena versus Daniel Bryan. And they screw Daniel Bryan. Randy Orton comes in, cashes money in the bank, and the Authority, Triple H, screwed Daniel Bryan. In the beginning of the Yes Movement. And the Yes Movement was something so magical. And Daniel Bryan was an underdog. You could use that. Or when Mick Foley in 1999, again, going back to Foley, when he won the World Heavyweight, when he won the WWE Championship against The Rock on that the first Raw of 1999. I mean, what was it? Yeah, the first Raw of 1999, right? On the other channel, WCW had Hulk Hogan versus Kevin Nash, Finger Poke of Doom, the NWO reunion. But on the WWE, they had, I used to, back in the 90s, Monday Night Wars era, I used to sleep on a sofa bed in my living room. And when some of the big moments would happen, man, I would go crazy in the sofa bed. You know, I was going crazy that night. when Foley won the title with DX's help and with Stone Cold's help. But who can forget Michael Cole's call about Foley sleeping in Motel 6s, right? And then Michael Cole goes, "This is for everybody who ever said you can't do it." And that moment alone caused the end of the Monday Night Wars, guys, because Tony Schiavone revealing the results of it, because Nitro was live and Raw was taped, and Eric Bischoff got in Tony Schiavone's ear and told him to reveal the results of of um, of Monday Night Raw, and he goes, uh, "Stay tuned, fans, because over on the other channel, the man who wrestled here as Cactus Jack is going to win their world title." And he sarcastically responds, "Boy, that'll put a lot of butts in the seat." In other words, Mick Foley's a loser, right? But fans were like, "Oh shit, Foley's going to win the championship," and they switched over. And WCW never recovered from that, because what did we get on the other channel? What did we get in WCW? We got a bullshit main event where Kevin Nash got beaten by Hulk Hogan pointing a finger in his chest, and he just laid down, and it was a screw job finish, and they fucked the fans that night in their hometown in Atlanta, Georgia, in the Georgia Dome. And they could do something like that with Sammy. They could build Sammy up. They could have another pay-per-view in Montreal, and he speaks French. I mean, that in Montreal, in all of Canada, really, but in Montreal specifically, because of the history of how French Canadians were treated, French Canadians were maligned, French Canadians were abused by Anglo Canadians. They're basically a minority within their country, even though technically, I mean, aside from quote unquote Indians or indigenous people, French Canadians are the real Canadians. Mm-hmm. Uh, even the insult Canuck comes from an insult that Anglo Canadians levied at French Canadians. So they have a lot of pride in their culture and a lot of pride in their heritage when they see one of theirs, a Quebecois person, become successful. They, their history is unlike any other history that exists here in the continent of North America, because there are people like Kevin Owens and like Sami Zayn that, despite living in a majority English-speaking country of Canada, they don't speak English. They only speak French. You know what I mean? And that's unheard of, because we have linguistic minorities here in this country, Hispanics, but Hispanics who grow up in the United States, even if they live in Hispanic towns like, say, Brownsville, Texas, or Laredo, or El Paso, or New Mexico, but they still master the English language. So they're not as secluded and as unassimilated as Quebecois people are. And then with Sammy, not only is he French Canadian, he's not French Canadian by blood. Like, he doesn't descend from France. He descends from Syrian. He's a Syrian descent, but he lived in Quebec, so he speaks French. But he's also Syrian descent. He comes from Syria, and there's a huge following of people in the Middle East, Arabs and Arab Americans, that follow the WWE. You see when they go over to those countries, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Dubai, they always get big crowds. So Sammy has that going from the Arabic speaking world and the entire Muslim world, really. And he's a man of principle. That's what people respect about him, too. When WWE first started going over to Saudi Arabia in 2018, uh, he declined to go because Saudi Arabia was participating in attacks on his country during the Syrian civil war. Collaborating with the United States on attacks on refused to participate in that. So he's a man of principle. So I like Sami Zayn. I feel like he's awesome. You know what I mean? He's a great wrestler, and I would love to see it. But anyway, Braun Breaker and Seth Rollins lay him out, and the show ends like that with Breaker and Rollins and Heyman laying over Sammy. But I hope this is good things for Sammy. You know what I mean? He's an awesome wrestler. And just an awesome guy in general. Peace.